Hello, and welcome back to the Skiff Travel Podcast. My name is Seth Borko. It's going to be a solo episode. My co-host Sarah isn't able to make it because I'm actually here in person with the founder of Mews. We're at the Mews Unfold conference in Amsterdam. Richard Valtr, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
It took me a while to get through that introduction. We're currently sitting in a dark room in your conference, but it's great because
in our underwear.
That's listeners, I can assure you we're fully dressed. Look, we're going to have a great conversation about hotel tech and the travel industry, and it's actually a really exciting time to be doing it. Let's start. Just first question, Richard. I want to start with kind of high level. Like, you're the founder of Mews. What was your vision, and what's the background of how we got to where we are today?
Well, I actually joke with most people. It's not a joke. Whenever we welcome new people into Mews, they always ask me, like, oh, you must be so proud. The company's progressed so much. There's just so many things that you must have not been realizing. Basically, how much has that vision actually kind of changed? And I think for me, the breadth of what we're trying to do and the complexity of what we're trying to do hasn't actually changed all that much. The kind of the central thought that we had, which was really, how to make sure that when I'm arriving at a hotel, I don't need to have that first, the first speech to be about, who I am, what I'm doing here, how much have I paid for the room, what payment method am I going to actually be paying for, but to have a much more natural, welcome in that way, and that ends up being a very, very difficult technological challenge that it's taken me 13 years to try and solve. But I think this is the interesting part of it, is that it just feels that with all the technology, with every single thing that's happening in the industry, this is still an unsolved issue of how to make sure that we can get away from the authentication part of the discussion and into the trust. And that will always actually kind of need a lot of technology, whether it's LLMs, whether it's computer vision, whether it's any of these different types of technologies, to make sure that we can get to a kind of a much more human-centric future, which is, I think, always what we've tried to do with the technology itself.
I guess it's kind of funny. It's sort of full circle. I think, like, we're talking way history. Before computers, they would have known you, right? Yeah. They would have had a nice little book, or if you think about like a Ritz, yep. He knew all of his guests. Yep. And then we had all this technology, and the technology was so great and drove efficiency, but then now we're all doing computers, and then you're solving this problem, and 13 years later, it's really not solved.
No, and I think that it's still something that the hotel industry. I think the hotel industry itself is probably about 100 years old. In the way that it thinks about itself as an industrial scale product, and I think in and of itself, you are still trying to hark back to those days when you're an innkeeper. And you would, in some ways, whether it was letters or something like that, coordinate with somebody else to be saying, I'm coming to Italy for the summer. And I think that we're still trying to get back to that idea of, I'm going to write a full letter about myself, telling this other person what I want to actually experience. And when you think about it from that perspective, you'd tell that person that much information of what you wanted to do, what you wanted to see, because this was going to be a really, really important trip for yourself. And I think that we're just in a day and an age where that acceleration of those types of experiences is possible because we can now travel on a plane. We don't need to travel for many multiple weeks basically in a horse-drawn carriage, boats and whatever. But the impulse itself still stays the same. There's an entire kind of novel of activities that we want to actually kind of do once we arrive, and we have this real human need to make sure that when we are traveling, that we don't waste any single second on anything where we're kind of staying idle. We want it to be something where we are creating a full memory. We're spending that amount of money because we want it to be memorable. We want it to be something that kind of stays with us. And I think that the fact that the methods of transportation, the methods of communication have all gotten more sophisticated, but they haven't changed that basic human need to actually kind of drive to that result.
So that's the vision. You're a hotel tech company. I guess we have a pretty generalist audience. I assume most of them know who Mews is, but you really are, at your core, PMS, property management system technology. You're the central nervous system for a hotel. That's where you want to be? And tell us about like the PMS, property management system tech market, and where you're growing.
So basically, when I first started Mews, I never really thought about it as a PMS per se. It's just something that we've had to do along the way, because it turns out that in order to actually drive the automation, drive that recognition, you need to become that kind of central data source. And you need to be that kind of central repository where everything else comes into. So whether somebody has booked on booking.com, somebody has put in other details into a booking engine or something like that, you need to make sure that there is one space for all of this data. So the PMS is the product that we usually go to market, but I think that in the evolution of Mews, we're trying to go from a property management system, fusing it with also a guest management system, and the way that we have structured our system to think more like a CRM rather than a kind of inventory management system from that perspective. But we also then think about, what is the overall effect that we're trying to have on the business itself, and on especially now that we're going after and working with some of the kind of largest brands in the world, we're thinking about how to make sure that that P doesn't just stand for the property, but it also stands for profit, and how do we actually kind of make sure that we're maximizing all of these different opportunities that hotels actually have with their guests and with what it is that they're doing.
So I like your vision, and I like the core tech, and we weren't really trying to build a property management system. We're trying to build something bigger, and we wound up with property management. The thing is, property management is not new technology, right?
Yes.
There were some very big incumbents that you're going up head to head against. So talk to me about like how do you succeed as a startup against an Oracle, these big established tech players?
Well, I think at the beginning, I have a very thick English accent, but I'm Czech. We're from a relatively kind of small town in Europe, and at the heart of it was just me being a hotelier, thinking this technology that I'm using every single day doesn't look like it's been built by hoteliers. It doesn't look like it's been built by people who actually use this system. My dad was a programmer. My mother was the entrepreneur of the family who got us into hotels in the first place. And I would spend my summer holidays, being a receptionist. And I just thought, like, this is stupid. Like, none of the technology that I'm using is actually enabling me to drive a better guest experience or a better performance of myself. And so really stupidly, I just thought, how hard can this be? And this is like 13 years later, I'm still thinking, like, why is this so hard? But
why is it so hard?
I think it's because of two things. One is because this was one of the first industries to digitize. And so, when the technology can't do much, it tries to still do a lot. So people built various different kind of database systems. They wanted everything to, it's like, can we actually kind of create loads of custom fields and fill up those custom fields with information? Because surely that would be the way to drive productivity. And it drives some productivity, but if you're not thinking about how that information is both, actually entered in the first place, so it isn't garbage in, garbage out. And you're thinking in the same way of, how do we make sure that we're getting the right information at the right time? And if you think about it, what a receptionist usually has to do is that, you're trying to check in at 3 p.m., multiple different parties that are coming in. And so what you should be thinking about is, okay, I now need to remember the very, very quick conversations that I had with all of those guests. And because of the kind of the 11 a.m. checkout and 3 p.m. check-in, you're usually kind of faced with an onslaught of people and arrivals that are coming in. You're trying to have a human conversation with all of them. It's not going to be possible, but then you're trying to think about, okay, how do I remember all of the facts and information about that person to put in, to the actual profile, all of those pieces of information that the system has technically been built for, because, technically it should be possible for me to enter all of that information so that it's useful. But if that's not the way that you're operating, if that's not the way that it actually works in real life, then you're never going to use that system in that way.
I always laugh when I check in and they hand me the paper printout of what's clearly a PMS form.
Yes.
And they're just like, why don't you fill out your birth date here? And I'm like, well, I mean, I don't know. I gave you my passport. You could probably guess my birthday from that.
And that's the thing. Like, that's why I think like we're living through a very exciting age of technology when all of this should start becoming a lot more kind of normal. It should be much more about you and me just having a conversation, and the system taking the interesting facts about that conversation and actually uploading it to the profile. It should be about, you having different interactions. Some of those interactions might be with a housekeeper. Some of those interactions might be with the reservations manager. Some of those might be actually with the GM. And all of those different interactions are going to be about different topics. But you need a system that's able to actually kind of think about that information, systematizing it, and then uploading it to the profile so that it's usable by the next shift that comes in, or maybe in 3 or 4 weeks when you come into contact with our brand again.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting what you're saying about how actually we always talk about tech debt in travel. I think about airlines and Amadeus. Amadeus is we don't need to get into it. They're a whole system for airlines that sell airline tickets. And everyone's like, oh, it's this old technology. It was actually cutting edge database technology in the 60s.
Yeah.
Amadeus, or actually I think it was Sabre. Sabre was American Airlines.
Yeah.
Sabre was American Airlines' in-house distribution system. It was one of the first wide-scale deployments of databases ever in history.
It was the first internet. Everyone talks about DARPA, and Sabre invented a large part of the internet.
Yeah, and modern protocols. So now, of course, you almost got punished for being an early mover in the 60s. You get punished in the 80s and 90s, and now you're stuck with this legacy stuff.
And that's the thing. I look at it and I'm like, I don't hate what companies before us did, because they were really trying to actually solve this very, very difficult technological problem with technology that wasn't quite there. There was no way to do computer vision at that time. There was no way to really think about human speech and the ways that we speak, and the ways, you speak with an American accent, I speak with an English accent, trying to understand all of those different things. Those are really, really hard technological problems to actually solve.
Yeah, when I say something is nice, it's okay. When you say something is nice, it's excellent. Well, let me throw something out there, and you tell me what you think. I mean, is part of the challenge the brands?
I'm not sure. I think what the brands have tried to do, when I say, for example, the hotel industry is about 100 years old, I think when you think about, the fact that we live and work in an industry and in an age where we can travel, and this is an industry that is built around this very, primal human need, but this very real industry that is actually created, you have to credit the brands. And you have to credit them for creating, I always think back to
the way, if I can, the way they did it is franchising, cookie cutter, and the way they do it is to say, you're a hotelier or you're even a property owner, you've got an asset that needs to earn an ROI, and don't worry about it. I've got a nice little PMS system. You don't need to think too much about it. It's pretty cheap, it's pretty affordable, we'll plug it in, you're good to go.
Yeah. But I think it was, because the first instance is standardization.
Yeah.
You want to kind of make sense of the chaos of the world, basically. So when everyone's kind of running their own B&B, basically, they have a multiple amount of rooms, you need a standardized way of how do you actually kind of make sure that the guests are coming in, how do you standardize the way that you think about hygiene, how do you think about, how you can actually clean 100 rooms, basically, in a very, very short amount of time. You need standardization. I think we're now, though, at a point where standardization is just, it's the base. And I think what we should be thinking about more is how do we elevate that? How do we actually make that a much more, because the thing that we want, again, is that 17th century horse and carriage perspective on experience, but we couldn't get to that because it was a technological problem. Now that we have the technology, we can go back to those experiences and make sure that we are experiencing those in 3 days, in terms of what would actually kind of that guest journey, was 2 years to put together, and now we can have that level of sophistication, and maximizing that, but it only actually takes 3 days to put that together.
There's a lot of tech companies that talk a big game. Like what you're doing, when you're talking a big game, a lot of them have failed or gone bankrupt or got acquired or just couldn't break, despite all the great promises, they just couldn't break in against the Oracles and the Sabre SynXis of the world. What have you done differently that you've survived where so many other hotel tech startups have fallen by the wayside?
I think, one is the fact that we're quite scrappy, that, we probably have an enormous amount of pride that we don't really like to fail. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that as a startup guy. But I think that's one thing. But I think what's, drives me and drives the team is that we really care about this industry. We care about us as hoteliers. We think we can do it better, not because we really like making money or something like that. I think it's nice to be big, but it's really, really good to have influence. And I think that's one thing, when we see 1,000 people all in a room together, 1,000 like-minded hoteliers, that we see ourselves as part of that community. I feel that, that's the passion, that's what drives us together. And it's that drive towards actually making this industry better. And I think that a lot of people have not succeeded in the past, primarily, I think, because of the fact that they look at this industry and go, oh, this is like a nice place to make money, or this is a nice place to kind of write technology for it. And they just don't care as much as we do.
And you think, maybe the flow through that is they hired technologists who don't know the first thing about hotels, maybe, or maybe.
And I get lots of angry emails from receptionists, basically being like, I'm sure you've never worked a day in your life, and it's like everyone has an opinion. I don't want to not respect people's opinions, basically, and we do have opinions about the way that we build our technology, the way that we build the system, but ultimately we're looking at it from the perspective of how does this make it better? How does it make sure that we're utilizing the technology in the best possible way? And ultimately, we're also kind of thinking about, could this industry be bigger? I think that this is the other part that really, really animates us, is that we really, really truly believe that travel is only at the kind of the cusp of what it will become, especially in the age of AI. We think that this is one of the most interesting industries. We already see a shift away from goods and into services. We think that the idea of you experiencing more of, having more experiences basically per year than you did the last year is already something that you're noticing in your life. More and more people are traveling more and more times throughout the year, and we just think that it's a more interesting life when you can have more travel.
Yeah, well, it is an interesting time. It's both interesting from travel. As we're recording this today, it will probably, for our podcast listeners, it will probably air later, but so you have some context. It is 100 days from Trump's presidency, and these are certainly interesting times. The old curse, may you live in interesting times. What's your take on this? Like, how bad is this going to be for hotels and your business?
I'm not sure. The one thing that I always think about is Trump's a hotel guy. He's not going to completely kill his own industry. So I think about it from that perspective. But the second is, it's really interesting to hear people talk about manufacturing and how we need to think about those things when so much of the world or so much of the industries that we have today are actually more about service, more about intellectual property, more about what we can actually do with ideas.
No, that's going to change. We're going to be sewing stuff in America pretty soon.
Well, that's the thing. I don't think that it is, and I don't think that that's ultimately how we should measure productivity. Is thinking about how many because I think that there's a limit to just how many small little pieces you can stuff basically into into another machine. How dexterous your hands are going to be. Like, a machine is going to do a much better job, but where humans excel and where it is a little bit more unbounded is actually in ideas. It's in what we can create, in the ways that we can share information. And I just think, just from a very kind of basic maths perspective, there's just more value in kind of intellectual property, in experience, in the ways that we actually value those things than in things like manufacturing. So I just feel like this will continuously kind of grow, and this feels like a bit of a blip, basically.
A blip. Okay, so I totally agree with you. That's what I was going to say. I totally agree with you on the services. I was being sarcastic. I mean, just make it clear for the record that I was being sarcastic about manufacturing.
You just want to go back to the factory.
That's right. The kids yearn for the factory. Yeah. The data mines. I spend a lot of time in the data mines. But no, I mean, but it's easy to call it a blip, and in the long run, we're all dead. In the long run, it's a blip. In the long run, we're dead.
Yeah.
Like, there are real hoteliers, and people, not airlines, hotels, experiences, DMOs that are really unsettled right now. And like, what does that? I mean, I don't know. Is now the right time for me to rip out my PMS and switch to Mews? Like, is that a threat to you?
It's an opportunity for us. Like, I think that, when you look at this industry, 95%, 96% of hoteliers are still using on-premise technology. They haven't even kind of gone to the cloud. Yeah. So, us, for example, talking about, an AI-assisted future, like, most hoteliers are still actually kind of working off the kind of the computer version of pen and paper. It's just like, it's a lot of things that you have to type in. It's a lot of different things that you're doing there. And I think to a certain extent that made sense, especially, in and around the kind of the 2000s, because of the fact that there was no huge productivity gain. I think we are now in an age of massive volatility. The idea of, whether it's staffing and people being able to kind of, leave their job and you having to overpay somebody, or you having to pay a lot more money basically to actually keep that staff member. Yeah. So I think that all of these things just bring with them huge challenges. There's also, in terms of huge flexibility of work, you can now kind of work for Amazon and do all of these different things basically, and that's really eating away at the amount of people that you can actually employ to create these types of experiences basically in a hotel.
The starting wage at an Amazon warehouse is more than the average salary at a lot of
exactly, and the love for hospitality is not going to keep that many people who are actually kind of wanting to work in hospitality. So we have to think about, what are the ways that we can attract people? What are the ways that we can make employment in hospitality more flexible? What are the ways that we can actually kind of think about, the fact that, you shouldn't probably be sitting behind that reception desk for 12 hours. It's in the same way of, how much automation can we bring to the back end? Do we actually need as many people to kind of run a hotel from that kind of back end operations perspective? So I think about, the profitability that we need to be able to create, to be able to, keep up with our interest payments and rent and whatever else it might be, but also to make sure that we can pay people enough. And that is, at the end of the day, very, very volatile. And that's why we try and think about the tools, whether it's revenue management, whether it's upselling, whether it's all of these different things that need to be part of an integrated system that ultimately manages, your ability to survive as a business, basically. And that is, I think, what we're really, really passionate about. And, when we go kind of high-minded about, let's create a much better industry, we also think about it from the perspective of, those data entry jobs where somebody is working, in a DOS-based system and kind of typing those things. Those are not great jobs.
That sucks.
Yeah, that really sucks.
My first job, which was at a bank, in the modern 2000s, involved a DOS green screen.
And it's terrible, right?
Yeah.
Like nobody, I think this is the thing, like, this industry is so exciting because you get to do things that feel like it's cheating, like it should be, it doesn't feel like real work to have a great conversation with a guest that's really interesting. And that's essentially, you've been shoved in to have a conversation with this person because you're an interesting person and the guest is really interested in what you have to say. That feels like it's not a real job. But in the age of AI, that is the most highly valued job that you can actually get.
So yeah, I love that. I love that. And you're talking, rightly so, as a founder and a leader, you're talking a lot about your clients. Let's talk about your business a little bit, like actual Mews and running Mews. How much, you raised a huge round recently. It was like, what was it?
$75 million.
$75 million. I was talking about uncertain times. It's scary times. The market's crashed. And then someone like you raises $75 million. That's got to be a nice beacon, a signal for the, what do you think of the travel tech landscape today? And what does that $75 million mean for Mews?
I think, I feel like a lot of the time whenever you raise a big round, people get very, very excited about the fact that, this is a big round, this is this is a new direction or a new thing, basically. And I think for us, it's more of a continuation of the work that we've been doing, and I think a recognition from the investor community that we seem to be doing something good. And I think that whether it's here at Unfold and we see the interest that hoteliers have and the fact that we have built this really, really interesting community, I think it's, for me, it's a validation of the fact that we seem to be doing something good in this industry, and and the money essentially kind of follows the good ideas and the good execution of those ideas. And
one of the things you've been doing a lot is a lot of M&A. Mm-hmm. Is Mews now an acquirer, like a big buyer of tech companies, or you can do a lot of consolidation?
I think that when you look at consolidation, you can look at it from two perspectives. One is, it's that you have an asset and you're enlarging that asset, or you can look at it from the perspective that we take on it, which is, we think that a lot of hoteliers are interested in working with us. We also see that a lot of the times it's actually really difficult to make that choice. We always talk about the fact that our main competitor in this industry is actually just inertia. It's the fact that, you might not want to do it this year because you've got a renovation, you've got, there's some, new tariff that's come in, so you've got, 45% cancellations on the day. There's always a reason to not do some of those things. And what we see is that we think that more and more hoteliers are interested in what we do. And so the way that we think about consolidation from this perspective is less from, let's say, a kind of asset accumulation perspective, but we think about it as actually, how can we change over more and more hotels to our way of working? How can we make that easier? And that sounds really, really weird and stupid to kind of say it in this way, but we think that, again, what we're doing is a good thing. So when we're acquiring companies, when we're actually kind of making our tent bigger, we just think that it's a good thing for us to have, some of the best experts that have existed in this industry that know their local markets really, really well. And how can we actually kind of make sure that we can kind of spread that gospel of, Mews as quickly as possible. The good Mews? The good Mews.
You say your competition is inertia. Arguably, it's a company like Sabre. Sabre just, again, we're time stamping for the audience, but Sabre just made a lot of news. They're spinning off their hospitality solutions. That includes SynXis. For our listeners who don't know, SynXis is a major player in the hotel tech space. Are they, do you see them as your, what do you make of that deal? Now that Sabre Hospitality is its own thing, they're going to be a standalone competitor to you, maybe, arguably. Does that worry you? What's your reaction to that news?
Not really. We cooperate and are great partners with Sabre. They've, as you were saying, they created the original CRS, and they are still a fantastic, distribution partner. They've had a PMS for a long time. I think very famously, especially some of the big brands basically kind of have used them before in the past. And I think that this is something that they do. But I look at it from this perspective that people in this industry get very, very het up about, who's competing with who. It ends up being one of these things where everyone has a booking engine to a certain extent. I believe that most PMSs basically should have a revenue management system as part of it, or some sort of algorithmic way to think about pricing, distribution, all of these different things. But the most important thing for this industry is to actually work together. So for us, we think of, this is why we have a very open marketplace. We believe that open systems, open APIs, all of these different things are good for this industry. It's the way that this industry works. You try telling your guest that they can't go to a restaurant that's right next door. That restaurant might be run or is part of the Marriott and you're a Hilton. If you tell a guest that they're not allowed to go there because they're only allowed to eat Marriott food, they'll either laugh at you or punch you in the face, and I feel like this is the same way that we think about our customers, that we're not going to mandate to them what technology they should actually use. So we think that the future of this industry is interoperable. We believe that most people will actually have to kind of work together. There's no reason for people to have kind of closed systems. So, I keep hearing like all of these things like, this is an all-in-one system. We're going to create, an amazing AI-powered all-in-one system, and it's going to kind of work like this. And I'm like, yes, but you don't get to make that choice. Yeah. The hotelier gets to make that choice, and they will want to choose what's best for them.
And I'm kind of just, these are things on my mind. It's hopefully it's still newsy when this episode airs. Marriott just bought CitizenM. We don't really know a whole ton about it. I'm kind of just asking you to react to some news. But CitizenM was known for its technology, and I can't help but think that there's a tech angle to that. Like, are the brands, I guess, are people starting to think about hotel tech differently? Marriott buying a more tech-forward brand, TPG, private equity, buying the hospitality, you raising $75 million. Like, are we going to see a shift in?
I think one of the things that I get really, really sad about is whenever I go to a lot of these industry events and there's hotel CEOs who openly talk about the fact that technology is not important, and the fact that it's not a thing, or it's that we have to kind of think about other things, and that technology might be good for hiring, but that's it. And you just think about those things, and you're going, like, why is it that we as an industry have we give technology such a cold shoulder? We don't think of it as an enabler. We think of the fact that it's almost like this thing where we have to go up against technology to kind of show them who's boss. And I think that's something where, I think that there's maybe a prosaic way to look at it, which is to say that, most people didn't grow up working with technology. So some of these conversations might just be, people who exactly that they've never thought about it as how can I actually use this to make my job better, my life better. I might have used Excel, I might be using all of these different things, but they're not actively on a daily basis making my life better. And I think that there's a new generation of hotel leaders and brand leaders that I think that do think about this in a completely different way. So I do think that it's more of an attitude thing, that I want more and more hoteliers to start embracing technology and to see it actually as part of what it is that they do.
Let's talk a bit about just future, like kind of a bit navel gazing, but just really like for our listeners who are really thinking about the future of travel, something that we do at Skift a lot. I mean, I would open it up. You mentioned computer vision twice now.
Right.
What the heck is computer vision doing in a hotel?
Well, if you just think about it, basically, like, if you can go super sci-fi. Well, I just think I've tried on the Meta glasses. I think about those basically. I think about, how to deliver the information about the guest the moment that he's actually come to you. Yeah. So I think about, how can you read that guest? What are the things that you could notice about that guest? The same way that we do when we're being empathetic, but I think about, how to augment that. Yeah. So, could you tell if that guest, is sad or are they anxious? Basically, are they sweating a lot? Have they? It's these types of things that actually humans are really, really good at. Humans are really good at kind of reading this, big data perspective and then being able to act on it really, really quickly. How can we augment that maybe with PII information, so profile information? Are there also other sources? So for example, the fact that I might have given my personal information to Uber. Yeah, so by the time I'm actually arriving, is there a way for Uber to hand over that information to kind of to make sure that then I know that this person's coming in. I know that this person is, an Amex holder or something like that.
Uber already knows they're picking me up at an airport.
Exactly.
I'm probably going to go to a hotel.
Is there a way to, again, make this more interoperable? Yeah, so that by the time that person's actually arrived, I'm ready for it. I know how to perform. I don't need to make them wait, for 45 minutes in a queue, or for 45 minutes because they've come, 2:15 and check-in starts at 3 p.m. How can I make sure that actually all of these pieces of information flow themselves into the way that we think about, getting the operations ready, so that when you come in as a guest, you feel like, oh my God, this is so seamless, and oh my God, this person's remembered me from the last time that I've actually been there. In the background, there's a huge big data operation going on, but to you as a guest, it just feels like, wow, this is seamless, this is amazing. This is actually like my idea of luxury.
What do you think? We last spoke at our Skift Megatrends. You were there. I mean, I would ask you maybe in the Megatrends-ish format, are there any trends that you think are interesting? You're telling computer vision about this stuff. What are, give us lightning fire style. What are the big, give me a couple trends, two trends that you like, and give me one that you think is BS. What's a trend you like?
It's probably easy with the trend I like. Because
give me one you like, but it doesn't have to be one that I really like. One. It can be anyone. Right?
I really like the idea of voice AI.
Okay.
Yeah, I just think that the idea of me, or I guess it's basically linked to having an agent and having kind of your information uploaded to an agent that is then able to make calls on your behalf. I really, really like that for guests. Yeah. And I like the idea that on the other side you'd have essentially kind of two machines talking to one another.
Have you seen that demo where the OpenAI thing does that?
And it's amazing.
That's so cool.
It's actually really, but I just think that that's, and if we go to a place where it's more like MCP rather than two machines actually talking together.
Hey, what's MCP?
It's what people are now trying to kind of push as like the new AI. It's basically where the AI is able to think about the APIs and is able to actually kind of interact with them, and also new APIs are being spun up basically to be able to. So it's just a way of kind of two machines essentially kind of, being able to communicate with one another without there needing to be a developer that links those two things together.
Cool.
So it's really cool. I think we're still a little bit further away from, where that completely kind of goes to. But what I like in the meantime is just the idea of me. I don't have time to phone up the hotel to tell them every single thing that I want to do. I don't have time to write that long, 3-page letter of saying this is my vision of how I would like to spend my time in Florence this summer. But the idea that an AI does that for me, and that they have a full conversation with another AI that is able to transcribe that information and then systematize it in a way that then when I arrive, I don't feel rushed off my feet. I don't feel like I have to kind of have a trade-off. But there's basically been this interaction between the two systems, and that they're able to create something out of it that ultimately is, a great guest experience or a memorable experience. That's what I get really excited about.
Anything you would fade? Any trends you would fade?
I just feel like the identity stuff. There's been so many people that talk about blockchain identity and stuff like that, and I see it all the time, and people go this is going to be amazing once we have identities
blockchain
on the
solves
blockchain.
This.
And it's blockchain solves that, and you know what? I don't think it solves it. I think I think other things solve it. Yeah, I don't think just one technology solves it. It's multiple technologies coming together.
I'm glad we're moving past blockchain, personally. Did Mews ever do anything blockchain related, or were you guys?
So in my founding document for Mews, it was all about the blockchain.
But 13 years ago, blockchain was big. But 13 years ago, no one was talking about it.
Right.
Did you buy any Bitcoin?
I bought my last Bitcoin. I sold my last Bitcoin in 2016. to buy a television, which is probably the most expensive television.
Yeah, it's your personal version of that guy buying the pizza with the first Bitcoin. It's like, wow,
it's so stupid. I would like look at that TV and I'd be like, wow, that is $80,000. Yeah.
Let me. I've got a closing question. It's kind of just a fun one. One of your staff members slipped to me that you're like a big history buff. We've been talking about old innkeepers and stuff like that.
Right.
I love history too. What I guess it's a two-part question. What's a great history destination for a travel? If you're a history buff, where would you like to visit? Where should I visit?
There's so many. Like for example, like now that I've lived in the US, I love going to the battle sites of the American Revolution, and I just actually really love doing those kind of road trips, whether it's going kind of to Boston basically, or Virginia, any of those different kind of places where some of the great battles happen.
You're a Brooklynite.
Yeah.
There was battles right in Gowanus and Brooklyn Heights.
Yeah. So I don't get to, there's no great monuments basically for those types of things, but we went, for example, with my son and daughter, well, my two daughters, we went to Washington Crossing, for example. We went around Trenton and tried to find all the different places around there.
I love the New York City history stuff. Have you been to Gettysburg?
No, so not yet. That's one of the big ones basically that I have to do, and yeah.
Gettysburg is actually really cool.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. I love that kind of stuff.
So I love that, but like the other places that I would really recommend is for example going to Sicily. I think actually Sicily has some of the finest Greek ruins as well, and we don't think about that because we think of Italy as being the land of the Romans and things like that. But if you're really into your Greek history, it's not just Greece; it's also places like Sicily as well.
Syracuse. It's like that's where the word tyrant comes from. The tyrant of Syracuse.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a similar experience in Morocco.
Right. Yeah.
Where they have Roman ruins in Morocco, and you're like,
beautiful.
What's this doing? You're like, dude, they were all over the place. So I love that kind of stuff. Anyways, that was my fun question to end on. Look,
but I think that it's a really, I think history is, for example, one of the great gateways to actually see the world through. So you not only are kind of traveling to a place, but you're traveling in time. Yeah. And I think that's again like where if we get to a place of AR, I always joke to. I think sometimes people that know me that if I wasn't doing Mews, I'd probably be doing battle reenactments and things like that. But I think that's what I just love thinking about in my kind of spare time is really how people lived and how similar they all sound when you read the writings. And then you think about what their experience of life was so different.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. Maybe we have to take some of it off the record so we don't bore too many. I think it's an interesting topic. I think one, what you just said, that no one was stupider than we are. Everyone thinks people in the past were stupid. They weren't. They were doing the best they could. What will they think of us? But I also think back to travel in a serious way is that you can use AI to write as many history papers as you want, and you will not learn jack shit until you actually go to Italy or to Sicily or to Morocco and you really see it. That, for me, I love that kind of stuff.
100%.
That's always been where it sinks in. And to me, that's like the question is all this VR or augmented reality or whatever. Are people going to stop? Can't we just look this up? Can't you just do a 3D tour? Can't you do a VR thing? I'm like, no, you're not.
But this is
going to Gettysburg
my other
is
thing
totally different than reading about
VR.
Gettysburg.
I think VR is total bullshit, basically. AR, I think, is really interesting.
Okay.
I think augmented reality, is going to be a thing. I think it's going to be something where you do want to, people like movies, right? We all know that it's stylized. We know that it's not real, but we like the perspective of it. And I think the future of hospitality is essentially a movie that you get created for yourself. Yeah, and it's basically like an immersive experience that you're going to kind of go into. And that's where I think that technology actually lives. But the whole idea of VR...
An immersive movie is a video game in a sense,
exactly,
right?
Yeah, exactly. And if you can play being Napoleon, or being, in my case, I was born near Austerlitz, and right next door to it, essentially.
Wellington.
And you know, it was,
Austerlitz, for our listeners, is where one of the big battles where Napoleon he was defeated, right, or won?
No.
He won.
It was his great victory, basically, and it was against the 3 emperors there. So it's, you know, it's a fantastic victory. It, like, you know, in the film version, it's not as grand as it kind of is. It's like it's that scene where all the horses go into the ponds, which did happen, but basically like isn't anyway. This is why
I have a co-host. If Sarah was here, she would not have let this conversation happen. So we miss you, Sarah, and forgive us. Either you're interested listeners or forgive us. But I think the point of these immersive experiences of this technology, and
you'll be able to see it. You know, so now I have to go to basically see a film of that happening. Wouldn't it be so cool to be able to actually kind of be a soldier, you know, in that experience, you know, and like actually kind of see it, you know, and getting AI to recreate it kind of for you with the full terror and all of those things. Like for me, like that feels like that's an interesting experience that you can have. Maybe for it to not be too photorealistic, but you know, you would have different settings basically on that experience, and I think those are the types of things where I get really, really excited about where technology can take us.
All right, I think that's a great place to end it. I've taken up enough of your time. It's a busy day for you, so thanks for being here. Thanks for chatting with me. Thanks for coming on the podcast. If you like the Skiff Channel podcast, hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, rate it 5 stars, leave a comment. Share with your friends. You know, all these AI and technology algorithms, they need that feedback to grow. So so give it, you know, help us out. So thank you so much. Thank you, Richard, for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Skiff Travel Podcast. Wherever you're listening, please make sure to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review. It really helps get the word out about us, our podcast, and make sure that we can still continue to bring it to you free of charge every week.
If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. That way you'll know every time we have a new episode.